This tutorial is part of a YouTube course playlist and a Udemy course. You can access the first phases of this course on YouTube or the whole course at Udemy. Links to both can be found in the video description. This is another tutorial where I'm just trying to show you some of the scope, the possibilities when configuring your Docker environment and Postgres database. So here we're going to create a PostgreSQL setup script. Let's remember that we're downloading an image from Docker Hub, and that's just a default setup of Postgres database. So that's going to be spun up in a container, and by default, it's just a basic Postgres database setup. So we want to provide some additional instructions potentially when we create the container. So that's what we're going to do now by creating a setup script. When the container or the Postgres database container starts, it's going to read this setup script and perform some additional actions. Let's first build the script that we're going to initiate when a Postgres database is created in a container. So let's first of all create a folder. We're going to call this scripts. You can choose a more appropriate folder if you prefer. So my folder is called scripts. Now inside of here, I'm going to create a new script, new file. So it's going to be called db setup dot, let's give this a .sh, not deb, db. So here we're building a shell script. So first of all, we're going to construct what is what is known as a shebang line. It indicates that the script should be executed using, in this case, the Bourne shell. So we're going to have /bin/sh. So this is the shell that's utilized in the Docker container. Now it's really important that you match this up. So here we're using Alpine, which just happens to use the Bourne shell. Now, not all images will. So if you are using a different version of Postgres, you need to make sure that you're supplying the correct shell name or specify the interpreter that should be used to run the script. So next up then, first of all, we want to export. This is going to be PG user is going to equal Postgres. That's the user we created, remember, when we defined that within our Docker, or now in our environment variable file. That's the actual user. So what we're doing here is this line will set an environment variable PG user with the value of Postgres. So this variable is used to specify the PostgreSQL username when executing any of the subsequent PSQL commands, PostgreSQL commands. So next up, now we define this PSQL. So we're going to use the C flag, and this time we're going to create what we're going to create. We're going to create a database. That's the first thing that we're going to do. So let's call this inventory. This is going to be the inventory database. So the PSQL utility is executed or is used to execute the SQL command. So the C flag in this case is used to specify a single command to be executed. Obviously, in this case, it's going to be create database inventory. So we're going to create a new database inventory. Now, just thinking ahead a bit, this database is going to need the UID extension installed. So we'll go ahead and in addition to creating a database, we will go ahead and actually install that. So this is going to install this extension, create extension if not exists. So obviously, if it exists, then we don't install it. So /UUID. So this is the name of the extension, OSSP. Don't worry at the minute exactly what that is. We can explain that shortly. So a little bit of that. So, and I think then we're done. Now the reality here is that the PSQL, that's the command line utility for interacting with our Postgres database. It's going to allow us to execute any SQL command as if we were to utilize the PSQL utility within our terminal here. So we can, like I said, execute pretty much anything that we want here. We can start to build tables and so on. So really we have the power to do just about anything at this startup. Now what we might, in addition to, rather than just add in users, we might start to think about different privileges ultimately for different users to really kind of set this up correctly, this database and the users correctly. Or else we might perform some other setup features that are required for our application to run successfully within this database. So now we need to actually share this file with the Docker container. Now, before we do that, here in the Mac, we're probably going to need to change this file so it can be executed. So we're going to need to change the permission of this file. So first of all, we need to change where the terminal resides. So far, we're in the main root directory of our project. So let's go ahead and type cd for change directory, and let's go into the scripts folder. We don't necessarily need to do that, but now let's use the chmod. So we're going to change the permissions. So let's apply U and X, and let's go for db setup. That's the file name. So we have two options here. Now this is just Mac only. So we have U plus X, so we can specify the fact that we want to restrict execution permissions to only the owner, or else we can just select X and that would just allow execution on this file. So, oh no, apologies, I forgot the dash plus X. Okay, so we add that. And now we can check out the permissions for this file. So we use the L flag and then the name of the file. So you can now see we do have execution permission. So we should now be able to work with this file, and Docker should then be able to utilize it. Now we need to pass this file over to the container when it is initiated. So here in Docker Compose, we had the volumes directive. So let's bring that in, volumes. So this is used to mount host directories, in this case, our scripts folder, into the Docker container that we're building, in this case, the Postgres database container. So this will allow us to share files between the host system and the containers. So we just need to specify what we want to share. In this case, it's going to be the scripts folder, and we don't need a trailing. And then we use the colon and then specify where we want to place that. So that's going to be the Docker entry point, Docker entry point initialization init db.d. Okay, so this directory is significant in the context of Docker images based upon the official PostgreSQL image. So what this is a directory inside of the PostgreSQL Docker container where initialization scripts are automatically executed when the container is first started. Okay, so let's bring down the database container. So inside of our containers, Docker desktop here, I'm just going to remove the dev.db, not the adminer. So just delete that, and that would just leave the adminer running. That's not a problem. Let's now restart this. So let's see if we can find the command quickly. Here we go. So Docker Compose up. So bring up the containers once again. Now, if we go into adminer, again, remember that's 127.0.0.1.80.80. It will probably ask us to log in again because we have now obviously a new instance of Postgres. So our database should be called inventory. Let's see if we can log in. And you can see our database has been created. Now, what's interesting here potentially, take a look. It doesn't look like our initiation file was executed correctly, which is great because now what we can now do is have a look in our container. So if you go over to containers, select the container name, we can now look at the logs. And what we might find is it now says, you might have correctly typed it, but it says here that we have created the database, which is all good. But down here, it says, as a hint, it looks like we have incorrectly defined. So a syntax error, unterminated quote string on line 7. So it looks like we've made a mistake here. We're told potentially where it is. So on line 7. So somewhere along here, we've made a mistake. So in actual fact, there are two mistakes here, or one error and something we need to add. So we want to specify the table we want to actually install the extension for. So we're going to run PSQL and then the name of the table. Now the problem here is this second set of double quotes. So I'm going to remove quote after the P. And you can see now everything should be absolutely fine. So I'll just go ahead and make sure the database isn't running. I'll delete the database container. Let's give this a go. And now we should be able to, in Adminer here, refresh. And let's go back to the database inventory. And you can now see in the routines, we have the UID installed, which is suggesting that our startup script is now working, in addition to the fact that we are utilizing, or we have created, the inventory database. That was, of course, a simple example. You may utilize that script in the future in one of your projects. It can be a good way of configuring the environment or the startup environment when the container starts the Postgres database.